a 1975 dime with no mint mark, a 1984 dime with doubling on Roosevelt's profile, a 1990 strike that slipped past mint quality control, and a 2001 error hiding in plain sight. For tiny coins, each carrying mistakes that turned a 10-cent piece into a collector's treasure. Some have sold for hundreds, others for thousands, proof that the smallest details can hold the biggest surprises. Do you know what to look for when these dimes land in your hands? In 1975, the United States Mint was in the midst of quiet transition. The Roosevelt dime, introduced in 1946 to honor President Franklin D. Roosevelt after his death, had been in production for nearly 3 decades. Its design by John R. Sinek was instantly recognizable. Roosevelt's profile on the obverse, a torch flanked by an olive branch and an oak branch on the reverse, symbols of liberty, peace, and strength. By this time, Americans rarely paused to study it. Tens of millions poured from the presses each year, struck in copper-nickel clad instead of silver, a change introduced a decade earlier to adapt to rising metal costs. The dimes of 1975 were expected to be no different, ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of coins that passed through hands, pockets, and purses without notice. Yet within that year's mintage, something occurred that has puzzled and captivated collectors for decades. A simple oversight, the omission of a tiny but crucial detail, gave rise to one of the most legendary modern errors in U.S. coinage. The 1975 Roosevelt dime struck without its mint mark. In the mid-1970s, mint marks were punched into dies by hand before coins were struck. At the San Francisco Mint, where proof coins were produced, the mark was an S, delicately placed on the obverse. These coins weren't meant for circulation. They were destined for collectors, sold in proof sets with polished surfaces and mirror-like fields. In 1975, a few dies somehow escaped the punch. They were complete in every other respect. Roosevelt's bust was crisp, the inscriptions flawless, but the S was missing. A small lapse, a detail overlooked by the mint's engravers, created a rarity so elusive that almost no one realized it existed. For years, these proof dimes circulated quietly within sealed government-issued sets. Collectors who bought them at the time likely glanced at their coins, admired the shine, then stored them away. It wasn't until a vigilant numismatist, examining his 1975 proof set under magnification, noticed something off. Where the S mint mark should have stood proudly on the obverse, there was nothing. Smooth, empty space. At first, he questioned whether it was a flaw, perhaps damage, or an unusually weak strike. But as he compared it with other coins in his collection, the realization settled over him. This was no accident of wear. The mint mark was never there at all. Imagine the rush of adrenaline in that moment. To most, it might seem insignificant, a missing letter hardly larger than a pinprick. But to a collector, that absence was deafening. It meant rarity, perhaps uniqueness. He examined again, hands trembling, checking the luster, the sharpness of the design, the flawless fields that could only belong to a proof coin. The discovery ignited a quiet storm of excitement, though at first he shared it cautiously, unsure how others would react. Could it truly be a new variety? As word trickled through collector circles and publications, skepticism met wonder. Some dismissed it as tampering or a novelty. Others were electrified by the possibility that a true no-mint mark proof dime existed, and from a year that carried no official explanation for such a blunder. Slowly, confirmation came as more examples surfaced. Not many, just a handful, but enough to prove the error was real. The value was modest at first. A few $100s, perhaps a little more for those early examples. But rarity, once confirmed, has a way of rewriting markets. The 1975 no-S dime wasn't like an ordinary double die or misaligned strike. This was a proof coin, created for collectors, and it had escaped the mint's quality control unnoticed. That made it both extraordinary and precarious, because once the public realized how few existed, demand began to build. Auction houses began listing them. Catalog descriptions emphasized the mystery of the missing S. Collectors pored over their own proof sets, hoping to find another. Most found nothing, which only deepened the rarity. With each appearance, the coin's price seemed to climb higher, defying expectations. The suspense built with every auction. How much would the next one bring? By the 1980s, the coin had reached several $1,000s at sale. In the 1990s, as registry sets and competitive collecting gained momentum, the value escalated further. A coin that had once cost just a few dollars as part of a proof set was suddenly worth more than many entire collections. For those who had discovered one early, it was vindication, a reward for vigilance, proof that numismatics was still full of surprises. For others, it became a symbol of the unattainable, the kind of piece that hovered just beyond reach, taunting them from glossy photographs in auction catalogs. The physical impact of the error made it even more alluring. Without the mint mark, the obverse of the 1975 dime took on an oddly stark appearance. The blank space beneath the date seemed almost deliberate, as though Roosevelt's profile had been struck in a kind of minimalist purity. Yet every collector knew this absence was no design choice. It was a mistake, a gap in the meticulous system of the mint. The smoothness of that missing mark seemed to carry within it all the weight of chance. A single die left unpunched, a batch of coins struck before anyone noticed, and a handful released into the world. Then came a twist that gave the story new life. The 1975 No.S dime wasn't an isolated accident. Similar mistakes appeared in other years. The most famous, the 1968 No.S Roosevelt dime, shared its lineage of oversight. Later, 1970 and 1983 also produced proof coins without mint marks. But the 1975 was different. It came at the very edge of the bicentennial celebrations, when collectors were already fixated on new designs and commemoratives. It was hidden in plain sight at a time when the mint was under greater scrutiny, making its survival all the more improbable. As time went on, the coin's rarity became undeniable. Fewer than 24 are believed to exist. Some specialists argue the number may be even smaller, with many locked permanently into private collections. Each auction appearance became a kind of numismatic event, whispered about, speculated upon, eagerly watched by collectors and investors alike. In some cases, prices surged past $300,000, cementing its place among the most valuable modern U.S. coins. The journey of the 1975 No.S dime illustrates how a small detail can transform an everyday object into something extraordinary. To hold one is to feel the weight of accident, chance, and discovery all at once. A coin intended to be flawless, made for collectors, ended up defined by its very imperfection. And while millions of 1975 dimes continue to circulate, jingling unnoticed in pockets and drawers, the No.S proof dime remains a whisper, a legend, a reminder that even in the most controlled processes, perfection sometimes falters, and when it does, it can change the history of collecting forever. In 1984, the U.S. Mint was running at full stride. The Roosevelt dime, introduced in 1946 to honor the late president who guided the nation through the Great Depression and World War II, had become one of the most familiar coins in circulation. By the mid-1980s, the coin's design was so ingrained in American life that most people never thought to look twice at it. The obverse carried Roosevelt's dignified portrait, sculpted by John R. Sinek, and the reverse displayed a torch, olive branch, and oak branch, symbols of liberty, peace, and strength. Year after year, billions of these dimes flowed out of the Philadelphia and Denver mints, struck in a copper-nickel-clad composition that had replaced silver in 1965. To the casual eye, the 1984 dime was no different from any that came before it. But somewhere in the massive machinery of the mint, a single mistake created something extraordinary. Die making in the 1980s was more precise than in earlier decades, but it was still not immune to error. Each die bore the engraved design that would be impressed onto thousands, even millions of blank planchets. A small flaw in a die could multiply into countless coins. And in 1984, one such flaw did. On a number of Roosevelt dimes struck that year, Roosevelt's face bore an unusual blemish, a raised line running across his cheek, from just below the eye down toward the jaw. It looked unnatural, almost like a scar, and collectors who encountered it began calling it the Roosevelt dime with a scar. At first, it passed unnoticed. In daily commerce, who would stop to study the fine details of a dime? Most people saw only the denomination, not the portrait. Yet for collectors with sharp eyes, The scar was impossible to miss. It wasn't wear and it wasn't damage. The raised line had been struck into the coin itself. That meant the flaw was part of the die, carried into every coin it touched. And that realization carried weight. A die error wasn't a post-mint accident. It was a glimpse into the very process of minting, a fingerprint of imperfection stamped into official U.S. currency. One evening, a hobbyist collector searching through rolls of dimes from a neighborhood bank sat under a lamp with a magnifier in hand. He had grown used to the rhythm. Scan the date, check the mint mark, glance at Roosevelt's features, flip the coin. Most were unremarkable. But then his gaze froze. There, on the cheek of Roosevelt, he saw it, a bold, raised line cutting across the smooth profile. His first instinct was doubt. Could it be a scratch? A trick of the light? He turned the coin, tilted it, examined it again. The line was raised, not cut into the surface. That meant it was part of the striking. His hands trembled as he realized what he had found. The discovery set his imagination racing. How many of these could exist? Was this a one-off, or had the mint allowed thousands, even tens of thousands, of flawed coins into circulation? He placed the dime aside, carefully wrapped in tissue, and spent the rest of the night combing through his rolls with renewed urgency. The thrill of possibility surged with every coin. Perhaps another scarred dime lay waiting, another fragment of the mint's oversight scattered into the world of commerce. Word of the error spread slowly at first, through whispers in local coin clubs and letters exchanged between numismatists. By the late 1980s, it began appearing in trade publications. Collectors debated whether the line was the result of a die gouge, a clash, or another type of defect. Whatever its origin, it was undeniable. The 1984 Roosevelt dime with the scarred cheek was real, and it was collectible. The market responded tentatively. At coin shows, examples changed hands for a few dollars, more out of curiosity than investment. Yet each sale carried with it a spark of intrigue. This was no ordinary variety. It was something bold, visible even to the naked eye, and those features are what collectors craved as years passed. The coin's reputation grew. Collectors who had dismissed it early began to reconsider as its presence in the marketplace remained steady but limited. The scarred dimes were not everywhere. In fact, compared to the billions of normal 1984 dimes, they were astonishingly scarce. A regular dime, worth only 10 cents, had been transformed into a miniature canvas of minting history, and its value began to climb. From a few dollars, prices rose into the double digits for nice examples. Mint state specimens, uncirculated and bright, fetched even higher sums. The collector who had found his first scarred dime in a bankroll watched with satisfaction as its status ascended year after year. By the 1990s, grading services confirmed the coin's legitimacy. Error specialists categorized it as a die gouge variety, caused by damage to the die itself, which then transferred the raised scar onto every coin it struck. This classification gave the coin a firmer standing in the numismatic world. No longer dismissed as a curiosity, it was now recognized as a genuine error with a place in reference guides. The transformation was complete. The 1984 dime with the scarred cheek had entered the canon of collectible U.S. errors. But the market for such coins is never static. Prices ebbed and flowed with the broader economy and with collector interest. At times, demand for error coins surged, driving values higher. At other times, the market cooled, and scarred dimes sold quietly, waiting for the next wave of attention. Yet through it all, the coin retained its allure. Each new collector who encountered it felt the same shock as the first discoverer, the uncanny sight of Roosevelt's dignified face marred by a mysterious line. It was not just a dime. It was a story captured in metal. The twist came when collectors realized that not every scar looked the same. Some coins bore a bold, prominent line, while others displayed a faint trace. This suggested that the die had deteriorated over time, the gouge evolving with each strike. Suddenly, the variety itself contained subvarieties, and collectors began chasing not just one scarred dime but examples across the spectrum of strength. This unexpected dimension added complexity and deepened the challenge. Which examples were the rarest? Which were the sharpest? Could one collector assemble a progression set showing the die's gradual decline? The possibilities expanded endlessly. The physical impact of the error cannot be overstated. On Roosevelt's cheek, a symbol of the president's enduring image, the scar became almost a symbolic mark. Some collectors joked it gave Roosevelt a battle wound, a scar of resilience. Others found it unsettling, as if the flaw diminished the coin's dignity. Yet even those who disliked its appearance could not deny its importance. It was a glaring reminder that even in the controlled environment of the mint, imperfection was inescapable. And it was precisely that imperfection that made the coin desirable. Over time, auction houses began featuring scarred 1984 dimes, showcasing their role in the narrative of modern U.S. coinage. Prices for top-grade examples reached into the hundreds, far beyond their face value. Collectors marveled at how a dime that once slipped unnoticed through hands at grocery stores and gas stations could, with the revelation of a scar, command such respect. The irony was not lost. The tiniest of errors had magnified the coin's worth by thousands of times. The collector who had first spotted the scar in his bank roll often reflected on that night under the lamplight. He had stumbled upon something hidden in plain sight, something overlooked by millions who spent their dimes without a second thought. For him, the scarred dime became more than a coin. It became a testament to the thrill of discovery, to the possibility that treasure lies in the most ordinary of places. And for countless others since, the hunt continues, each 1984 dime examined carefully, each cheek inspected for the faintest line of history etched by chance, and in the end, the 1984 scarred Roosevelt dime remains both ordinary and extraordinary. Billions of its kind exist, indistinguishable at first glance, but only a select few carry the scar, the accidental mark that transformed them into rarities. For collectors, that scar is not a flaw but a signature, an echo of imperfection that elevates a 10-cent piece into an object of fascination, value, and enduring mystery. The dime of 1990 belonged to a series that had already been in the pockets of Americans for nearly half a century. The Roosevelt dime, introduced in 1946 to honor President Franklin D. Roosevelt, had become one of the most familiar coins of modern U.S. coinage. Its design, by John R. Sinek, was straightforward yet iconic. Roosevelt's profile on the obverse, and on the reverse, a torch flanked by an olive branch and oak branch symbolizing liberty, peace, and strength. By 1990, billions of these coins had been minted. To most people, the dime had faded into background noise, useful for parking meters, vending machines, and exact change, but hardly something anyone would pause to examine. Yet within that year's mintage, a quiet disruption occurred, one that would challenge assumptions about the precision of the U.S. Mint and ignite waves of curiosity among collectors. The year was not particularly unusual for the Mint. In 1990, Roosevelt dimes were struck at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, the latter producing proof coins for collectors. The transition away from silver had long been completed. Since 1965, dimes had been made of a copper-nickel-clad composition, durable and affordable. The design itself had remained unchanged for decades, with only minor variations in detail. Stability seemed to be the hallmark of the dime. But minting is an industrial process, and even within strict systems of quality control, errors can escape into the wild point. One of the most startling errors of 1990 involved proof dimes struck at the San Francisco Mint. These were coins designed for collectors, crafted with extraordinary care. Proof coins underwent special preparation. Dies were polished, planchets carefully treated, and strikes executed with precision. The defining mark of these coins was the S mint mark, identifying them as products of the San Francisco facility. Yet, in 1990, something slipped through. A small number of proof dimes were struck without the S mint mark entirely, creating what became known as the 1990 No-S Roosevelt dime. The absence of a single letter may sound trivial, but within numismatics it carried seismic weight. That S was not merely an initial. It was a signature of identity, a marker of origin, a confirmation that the coin was indeed a proof issue and not an ordinary dime meant for circulation. Without it, the coin entered an ambiguous space. Struck with proof quality yet missing its defining badge, blurring the line between common and extraordinary. The story of discovery began quietly, as it often does. A collector who had ordered proof sets from the U.S. Mint in 1990 opened the familiar packaging, expecting the standard assortment of pristine coins. As the lenses of the plastic holder caught the light, something seemed odd. The dime gleamed with the mirrored surfaces and frosted devices of a proof. But when his eyes drifted to the space beneath Roosevelt's neck, where the mint mark should have rested, there was only emptiness. No S, just blank space. The realization came in a slow, unsettling rush. He checked again, then again, convinced perhaps that the letter had been obscured by dust or light. But magnification confirmed it. There was nothing there. His heart quickened, caught between excitement and disbelief. Proof coins were supposed to be flawless, controlled, perfect. To find one that broke the rules was to stumble into an accident of history. For days, he kept it close, showing it to fellow collectors, many of whom at first doubted. But word spread. Other sets revealed the same anomaly. And soon, the whispers became declarations. A new major modern error had been found. At first, the market did not know how to treat it. Error coins had long fascinated hobbyists, but proof errors of such magnitude were nearly unheard of. The 1968 No-S Roosevelt dime was already famous, as was the 1975 No-S Roosevelt dime, each commanding significant premiums. The 1990 version suddenly joined their ranks, though at the time, no one knew how many existed. Would dozens surface, or hundreds, or perhaps only a handful? The suspense lay in that uncertainty. Prices climbed rapidly as word spread through collector circles and numismatic publications. What had cost just a few dollars as part of a proof set was now selling for hundreds, then thousands. Auction houses began to feature the coin, and dealers clamored to acquire examples. The thrill of the chase electrified the market. Every unopened 1990 proof set now carried with it the possibility of hidden treasure. Families dug through drawers, safe deposit boxes, and attics, hoping to find one of these elusive mistakes sealed away in mint packaging. The progression of value followed a dramatic arc. In the early 1990s, examples fetched several $100s. By the late 1990s, as their rarity became clearer, the price doubled and tripled. Certified high-grade examples began crossing auction blocks for four-figure sums. A coin once dismissed as just another dime now had the power to transform the fortune of its finder. The market buzzed with speculation. Would its trajectory mirror that of the 1975 No-S proof dime, which had achieved legendary status and sold for tens of thousands? Or would the 1990 dime plateau, valued but not revered? But what made the error particularly striking was not simply the missing mint mark. It was the context. Proof coins represented the pinnacle of mint craftsmanship, yet somehow, a die without the S had been prepared and put into use. This was not a case of a circulation strike mishap. It was a breakdown in the very system designed to deliver perfection. The contradiction fascinated collectors. How could a coin meant to embody precision instead symbolize oversight? And then came the twist that deepened the narrative. While the No-S dimes became the headline, stories began circulating of transitional anomalies in regular circulation strikes as well. Some researchers suggested that leftover proof dies might have found their way into circulation, creating sharp-struck examples with unusual finishes. Though unconfirmed in many cases, these rumors added an air of mystery, hinting that the story of the 1990 dime might not be confined solely to its missing mint-mark proofs. For the collector who first uncovered the anomaly, the journey was transformative. What had begun as routine, opening a proof set, admiring its brilliance, had become a tale retold at shows, in magazines, even in whispers among dealers who regretted not catching the error sooner. He recalled the disbelief of those early moments, the hesitation to trust his own eyes. The coin, in its silence, had tested him, and by trusting that something was amiss, he had stepped into numismatic history. Today, the 1990 No-S Roosevelt dime remains one of the key modern rarities, with certified examples in high grades bringing thousands at auction. One sold for over $3,000, another even higher depending on condition and provenance. The ordinary 1990 dime rattles unnoticed in change, yet the proof error stands apart, its very existence defying the assumptions of precision at the mint. It embodies the thrill of discovery, that something so small, so easily overlooked, can become a treasure of immense value. What captivates collectors most is how a single missing letter could reshape the destiny of a coin. The absence of the S mint mark turned the 1990 dime into something more than a piece of currency. It became a symbol of chance, of how even in a system designed for perfection, the unexpected can slip through, waiting decades to be recognized. And the twist remains that, though rare, more examples could still be hidden, sealed away in unopened proof sets resting quietly in closets and drawers, their owners unaware of the rarity they hold. The story is not finished. It lingers in the suspense of what may yet be found. The 1990 US one-dime error endures not because of grandeur, but because of its subtlety. A coin identical in every way to its counterparts, save for one missing letter, reshaped its destiny. It reminds us that even the smallest details can conceal the greatest mysteries, and that in the world of coins, the ordinary often hides the extraordinary. In 2001, the U.S. Mint struck tens of millions of Roosevelt dimes, continuing a tradition that had lasted since 1946. The design, featuring Franklin D. Roosevelt on the obverse and a torch flanked by an olive branch and oak branch on the reverse, had become a familiar piece of American currency. By then, the dime was a workhorse of commerce, circulating freely in pockets, cash registers, and vending machines across the nation. Struck in copper-nickel-clad composition, these dimes were intended to be nothing more than ordinary change, blending into the massive currency that kept the economy moving. Yet among the countless pieces struck that year, a few escaped the press's bearing flaws that should never have existed, flaws that would later set them apart from the millions of their kind. The process that created these coins was one of speed and precision. The mint's machinery struck planchets at astonishing rates, pressing the Roosevelt design into each thin disc of copper and nickel with immense pressure. Dies had to withstand the constant pounding, often creating hundreds of thousands of impressions before being retired. But in 2001, something went wrong in select presses. Whether through misalignment, doubled impressions, or improper preparation, a handful of dimes left the facility with clear signs of error. To the untrained eye, they seemed like any other dime, but to those who knew what to look for, these tiny irregularities told a much larger story. One of accident, rarity, and unexpected value. It wasn't until collectors began carefully examining their pocket change that whispers of the 2001 dime error began to circulate. Some reported doubling on the obverse, where Roosevelt's motto and lettering appeared shadowed, as if the coin had been struck twice but slightly out of alignment. Others noticed missing elements, faint strikes, or unusually weak details, suggesting something had gone awry with the dies. And then there were those who stumbled upon off-center strikes, where the entire portrait seemed shifted, leaving blank crescents of metal where design should have been. These anomalies were not uniform, and that only added to the mystery: what exactly had happened at the mint that year? One particular collector, a hobbyist who had spent years searching through rolls of dimes from his local bank, made a discovery that would change his outlook on the hobby forever. He was used to the long, patient process of hunting, hours spent unwrapping roll after roll, his eyes scanning quickly yet carefully over thousands of coins. Most days ended in nothing but fatigue, but that day, as he slid a 2001 dime into his palm, something caught his attention. The lettering along "In God We Trust" seemed unusual, thicker, almost doubled in places. Turning the coin under the light, he saw clear separation in the strokes of the letters, the kind of spread that could not have been caused by wear or circulation. His pulse quickened as he realized he wasn't just looking at another coin. He was holding an error, one that most collectors only dream of encountering in the wild, at first. He wasn't sure how valuable it might be. Error coins often lived in a strange world where rarity didn't always equate to astronomical value, and demand varied depending on the nature of the flaw. But he knew one thing: this dime wasn't ordinary, and it deserved closer attention. He shared his find with other collectors, posting photographs online and reaching out to numismatic experts. Reactions came swiftly. Some congratulated him, others expressed envy, and a few skeptics questioned its authenticity. But when the coin was finally examined and authenticated by a third-party grading service, its place as a legitimate error was secured. From there, the dime story began to unfold. Early sales of 2001 error dimes were modest, sometimes fetching only a few dollars above face value. Collectors treated them as curiosities, interesting but not yet recognized as highly significant. But as more people learned about the existence of the doubling and other variations, interest began to grow. Coin forums buzzed with reports of finds, some exaggerated, some legitimate, and soon the 2001 dime was no longer just another date in the Roosevelt series. It was a target for treasure hunters across the country. Prices began to climb slowly. A double die example that might have once sold for $10 was now going for $30, then $50. Off-center strikes and dramatic misalignments, depending on their severity, pulled in even higher bids. Collectors started competing, not just for the errors themselves, but for the best-preserved examples, those that still gleamed with original mint luster, unmarred by circulation. As grading companies slabbed more of them and auction houses recorded their sales, the narrative shifted. This was no longer an oddity, it was becoming a recognized chapter in the story of Roosevelt dime errors. And then came the twist that surprised even seasoned collectors. In the midst of the growing attention, a small number of 2001 dimes surfaced with a strikingly different anomaly. Instead of doubling or misalignment, these coins appeared to have been struck on the wrong planchet. The thin copper-nickel disc that should have borne Roosevelt's portrait was replaced, in a few cases, with planchets intended for foreign coinage or even smaller U.S. denominations. The result was astonishing. Dimes that were lighter, slightly off in diameter, or showing incomplete designs because the planchet simply didn't match the die's intended surface. These weren't just errors, they were accidents that defied expectation, making them exponentially rarer than the already prized double dies. The discovery of these wrong planchet strikes sent ripples through the collecting community. While a double die might be collectible and a misaligned strike intriguing, a dime struck on an entirely incorrect blank was a once-in-a-generation find. Auction records began to reflect the frenzy. One example, authenticated and certified, crossed the block for several $1,000s, far surpassing the modest prices that earlier 2001 dime errors had commanded. The humble coin that had once been overlooked in spare change had ascended into the realm of elite collectibles. For the collector who had first uncovered his double die example, the journey had been nothing short of transformative. What began as a quiet hobby turned into a story he could share with other enthusiasts, a reminder that treasures still lurked in the most ordinary places. His dime was not just a coin, it was a piece of history, a symbol of the unpredictability of the minting process, and proof that chance still played a role in numismatics. As time passed, the value of the 2001 dime error continued to fluctuate, influenced by demand, discoveries, and the ebb and flow of interest in modern errors. Some collectors speculated that prices would continue to rise as more examples were pulled from circulation and tucked away, while others cautioned that the market might cool. But the truth remained that each surviving error was finite, each one a reminder of that year when the mint's machines faltered and allowed imperfection to slip through. The suspense of the 2001 dime lies not only in its physical form but in the story it tells. A coin meant to be common instead became remarkable. A design meant to be flawless instead bore the marks of human and mechanical fallibility. And for collectors, that imperfection was everything. It turned a 10-cent piece into an artifact of chance, history, and enduring intrigue.